Hello, class. Welcome to my first attempt. Well, actually, it's my fourth take or something. It's been having trouble with the technology, but my first attempt at teaching a virtual class by recording. So today we're going to look at Canada in the Great Depression. This is just to supplement what you've been reading in the textbook and watching on Canada People's History. It's not comprehensive. We're just hitting upon a few points that I'd like to re-emphasize. So, the start of the Great Depression in Canada. So, the first country really hit by the Great Depression was the US, where the stock market crashed in October 1929. And the US responded by using conservative economic strategies like putting up tariff barriers against international trade. This was to make it more expensive to buy foreign products, so domestic products would seem cheaper and therefore it would favor domestic production. However, this didn't actually work effectively. It just cut the US off from world markets, and a lot of people and banks had lost their money in the stock market crash. So it didn't really benefit the American economy in the end. However, it did greatly hurt the international economy. Canada was one of those hurt the most because then, like now, our trade was very tightly linked with the US. Uh, Additionally, Canadian farmers were suffering because they could not. First of all, they'd been overproducing their products, so the prices crashed. And then, because they'd been overproducing, they exhausted some of the soil. In addition to a hit of dry weather, this caused the topsoil, the most fertile soil, to blow away, creating a dust bowl and large dust storms on the prairies. This is the same thing that was happening in the US at the time. So Canada had an election in 1930. Our Prime Minister at the time, William Lyon Mackenzie King, did initially take the Depression very seriously. And when he started to realize that it was a big problem, he tried to use it to his political advantage. During the election, he promised to give no more than a 5-cent piece to any province that voted for a party other than the Liberals. Canadians saw this as a really arrogant attitude and voted him out, and in came Conservative R.B. Bennett. Bennett was a millionaire. He was a fairly compassionate man, but he was not the man of the hour. His strategies just were not enough to help Canada significantly in the Great Depression. So, three things he did pretty quickly upon being elected was banning immigration. I believe Americans and British citizens could still immigrate, but everyone else was banned. Uh, the main reason for this was not xenophobia, it was a lack of jobs. Canada was, I think, more than 25% unemployment at the time. If people were to immigrate here, they would not be employed. So there was no point. He also banned the Communist Party, which was becoming more popular due to people looking for solutions to the Depression. And he put up tariff barriers because he thought that would protect the Canadian economy. He thought that his tariffs would be so high that he would blast Canada into the world market because it would intimidate other countries and cause them to lower their tariffs so they could import important Canadian products like agricultural goods and woodstuffs. It did not work. Um, so instead of setting up a comprehensive social safety net, Bennett stuck with his conservative ideology and used his own money to provide assistance for Canadians in need. So Canadians would write him letters asking for money for food, Christmas presents to the family, rent, whatever, and he would take money from his own wallet, write them a letter, and send them the money. It seems quite unorthodox for now. But Bennett believed in charity rather than government assistance. He did create some work programs, but not enough to deal with the magnitude of the crisis. Uh, to avoid the threat of revolution from single young men, the most dangerous element in any population, he sent them to remote areas to participate in work camps, building roads and other infrastructure projects. The conditions in these camps were poor, and they were paid a pittance, 20 cents a day, which even at that time was considered a poor wage, basically starvation wages. Um, and this caused the young men to get angrier. And at the camps, they organized. They started reading Marxist literature, and they became more militant. They decided that they would go to Ottawa and speak to the government directly. Uh, and they gathered in Vancouver and started the On to Ottawa trek, riding the rods, so the railroad, um, east. And as they went east, they gathered more and more. And the government saw this. They didn't like what was coming, so they ordered the train be stopped in Regina. The men were obviously angry that they'd been stopped, and so they rioted. In the end, the Canadian government allowed a small delegation to go to Ottawa and speak to the government, though Bennett was not interested in receiving them himself. And again, Canadians didn't like that he wasn't willing to hear the problems of the people, and this is one of the reasons why he lost the election in 1935. And William Lyon Mackenzie King returns. So King was a very pragmatic leader, and he decided that he would copy what was happening in the US because the American president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was becoming quite popular with his New Deal programs. King announced Canada would have a little New Deal. So in the US, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as FDR, had started a bunch of very ambitious government projects where people would be employed to build highways, to build dams, to build a lot of the infrastructure projects which made the US a great country afterwards. Um, Roosevelt was inspired by a liberal British economist named John Maynard Keynes. Keynes saw that the Depression was so severe that private businesses were not able and did not have enough capital to dig their countries out. So Keynes said the only institution that can get the economies rolling again were governments. The government need to spend their money to create jobs, and that would give those people money so they could buy products from stores, which would then demand products from factories, which would give people in factories jobs, and that would start the whole wheels of the economy rolling to get the country out of depression. So to this day, Keynes' ideas are quite popular. We can see right now with the coronavirus that governments are putting a lot of money in to bail out people or to give people money to spend, but we cannot spend it because we're trapped at home. One thing that politicians ignored that Keynes said is Keynes said when the economy is good, governments need to cut spending and they need to save it up and allow private business to do their thing during times of prosperity. And that way they'll have enough. So when the economy is bad again, the government can start spending and give people this temporary jobs, which again they'll relinquish once the economy is good. And so it'll account for both aspects of the business cycle. But politicians don't like to be seen cutting programs or cutting jobs. So now governments will do the spending aspect without the cutting aspect, which has caused governments to go into more and more debt since then. So King downloaded most of these little New Deal projects to the provinces and provincial premiers. And BC's premier, Duff Patullo, was a big project manager, meaning he engaged in many big projects. The Patullo Bridge is the best example of this. And there was a large pool of unemployed young men in BC for this because many had drifted here due to the mild climate and the Patullo's relief projects. However, in 1938, King cut the relief aid he was giving to the provinces, so Patullo didn't have such a big budget to spend on his projects, causing these men to become unemployed again. So they staged a sit-in in downtown Vancouver, and this was supported by local communists. The government and the mayor uh, didn't react immediately, but pretty soon they got tired of the sit-in and sent the police in to beat up the men who were sitting in, which caused a riot and $35,000 in damage, which was bad for the time. Uh, so one important aspect of the Depression is that Canada gained two new political parties. One party was the CCF, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which is now the NDP. This was Canada's Social Democratic Party, running on socialist ideals. They issued the Regina Manifesto, which called for public ownership of key industries in Canada, more social programs to help unemployed, elderly, and sick citizens. Since the Depression, the second point that they wanted has been largely enacted, as now we have unemployment insurance, robust pension program, CPP, as well as various programs to help sick and disabled people in Canada. Second party was a pretty unique idea, and it was quite influential in Western Canada until the late 80s and early 90s. It's called the Social Credit Party. It was a right-wing party founded by a Christian minister called Bible Bill Aberhart. He was very socially conservative, um, but his economic ideas were not what we think of as orthodoxy in the right wing of democratic countries, that they were anti-capitalist, anti-bank, anti-big business. Eberhard decided that he would print off money and give each person in Alberta, his province, $25 a month, and they could use this to spend on basic necessities. These ideas haven't disappeared. Uh, this past year, there was a candidate in the Democratic Party in the US named Andrew Yang who proposed a basic dividend, the UBI, of $1,000 a month per person. One kind of dark aspect to the 30s and Mackenzie King's legacy was his affinity, or maybe not affinity, but lack of rejection, complete rejection of Nazism. So, or maybe a better way to say is misinterpretation of Hitler. So as tensions in Europe rose, Mackenzie King went to Germany to see what Hitler's intentions were. He went to some rallies, toured around with government ministers, and had a meeting with Hitler. At that meeting, he looked into Hitler's eyes and discovered that Hitler truly loved his fellow man. Uh, King said that although he could never be a Nazi due to their cruelty, um, he gave Hitler a very large compliment, saying that Hitler would someday be seen as a Joan of Arc among the deliverers of his people. Joan of Arc was a medieval warrior maiden who helped liberate France from English occupation during the 100 Years' War. So I guess King meant Hitler would deliver Germany from, I don't know what occupation they were suffering from. I guess imaginary Jewish occupation. Um, and and that's how they would be remembered. So King instructed his diplomats to not interfere with Germany or Italy's aggressive acts in Europe and beyond Europe. For example, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, then known as Abyssinia, the Canadian ambassador to the League of Nations wanted to put sanctions on Italy. King reacted to this next day by firing the ambassador. In 1939, there was a ship with 900 Jewish refugees from Europe called the SS St. Louis. First, they went to Cuba and were sent away. Then they went to the US and were sent away. And then they came to Canada and were sent back to Europe, where many of them perished in the Holocaust. Canada's immigration director, Bill Blair, said of these Jewish immigrants and other Jewish refugees trying to come that none is too many. Canada has recently apologized for this, but it has been a stain on our record. And that is the lesson for today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below or email me. Thank you.